Invest Africa, proudly brought to you by KPMG.
It's that time of the week again where we look at investment on the continent. Hello and welcome. I'm Nozi Pombandra and this is Invest Africa. Thank you for making the time to join us today. Now, the African Development Bank tells us that foreign investment is outpacing foreign aid. What used to be a continent dependent on handouts from donor countries is now a place that those same countries are looking to invest. But despite the positive outlook, Africa is still a poor continent. It is unlikely that the Millennium Development Goals to reduce poverty by half by 2015 will be met. From where we sit today, the resource-rich continent still has a way to go to achieve its potential. But it's this potential that's attracting foreign currency to these very shores. Joining me now to discuss this topic from Nairobi, we have Jude Anyiko. He is the CEO of Britam Asset Management. Rory Ord, he's sitting in Cape Town. He is the head of Riskura Fundamentals. And with me in studio is Dumi Jere. He is the head of strategy in Africa for AfriCatalyst, as well as Jolene Young. She's an associate director at KPMG. Now, for you at home, if you'd like to be a part of this conversation, you can do so by talking to us on Twitter. That's by following me at Nozi Pombandra or at CNBC Africa, and of course using the hashtag InvestAfrica. Perhaps let's start off our conversation in Nairobi, and coming to you, Jude, first. Does Africa still need foreign aid?
That's an interesting question. We still need foreign aid, but how the Kenyan politicians use it usually say it should not be for free. We should be looking at foreign aid and business. So foreign direct investment and foreign aid. So we have moved from foreign aid alone to also foreign aid and investment.
Let me take that analysis that you've put on the table and take it to Cape Town. Rory, both aid and investment, is this the new path that we're seeing Africa travel?
Well, yes, I think you can almost look at foreign investment and aid as being on a spectrum, and there's also several categories of funding that comes to different African countries that sit somewhere in between, both from the aid on the one end to pure commercial investment on the other. And we've seen a number of international agencies such as the DFIs, the development finance institutions, really run this sort of hybrid form of development capital across the continent for a number of years now, which has worked to a large extent in many places on the continent.
Jolene, can you support that statement that where aid has been attracted into the continent, it has been used efficiently and has worked from the position where you sit?
I can. If I have a look at the investment that the World Bank has made in the payment systems, helping central banks across the continent to implement real-time gross settlement systems to ensure that we achieve a fundamental difference at a payment system level, and certainty in payment and certainty in settlement across the continent gives foreign direct investors the security and the comfort that their money will be put to the use that they need to put it to the use. So there is a case for the foreign aid having made a fundamental difference across the continent at that level from a payments perspective.
Dumi, are there still sectors that though we could confidently say are still ripe for aid rather than investment? And in particular, I'm thinking of those sectors that fall under the public sphere, health in particular, where governments might still need some support from those who have a bigger financial muscle to help them before we start talking about targeted investment.
True. No, I certainly think that there are sectors that still can do with a bit of aid. I think my view is that foreign aid can be a very good instrument for public, for financing for public goods. You know, when you look at things like access to clean water or child immunization, or some infrastructure development that foreign direct investment will not necessarily go into and invest in because it won't give them the returns that they need. So I think those such areas, they still exist, And without those, then I think we would be looking at a more catastrophic picture in terms of, for example, if we're to zoom down in the area of health. If you look at the child immunizations, the tuberculosis, malaria, and so forth, all those things that are being addressed by foreign aid in most of these countries in our continent.
Jude, I want to maybe flip the conversation and come back to Nairobi, in particular looking at the public sphere, and pose the question, why are governments failing to make public service investments attractive for those who do have the funds to plow into that area?
The challenge we face in Kenya is that it's still the public, what is seen about the public sector investment, it's seen as a public good, not for profit. So most of the Kenyan investors, like the local pensions, are looking for profit, whereas the public are seeing it as a public good that is not to be charged for profit. Now, that's the challenge we are facing in Kenya.
Staying with you, Jude, just let's talk about public-private partnerships. I mean, these have been heralded as the solution to merging public needs with private sector funds. Would you say that PPPs are working to try and attract investors to maybe be a bit more bullish about public sector investments?
Yes, PPPs are likely to work in Kenya. If I was to look at it in the sector of education, where the government of Kenya is looking to put up hostels using the PPP model, yes, they're likely to work in Kenya. But what has happened, we have foreign investors who are looking to invest in the PPPs, but local investors are shying away from these PPPs in fear of, we can say, sovereign risk, government, change of regime. So there's still the political risk angle for the local investors. So the PPPs are likely to, we are likely to get foreign investor participation in Kenya.
So it certainly seems that PPPs might be one way to go. Rory, let's come to you in Cape Town and maybe focus on foreign direct investment now and ask you to paint us a very broad picture of the big trends we're seeing on the continent. Which sectors are really attracting the lion's share of investment, and which markets are maybe have first mover advantage in this regard?
Well, if we look back over some history, foreign direct investment used to come into Africa principally to take advantage of the resources that Africa has. So predominantly into the oil and mining sectors, you would have foreign companies plowing capital into those areas in order to extract those resources and take them to other parts of the world. And in many respects, that is still there. So that whole tier of foreign direct investment still exists in Africa. The trend that we can lay on top of that, though, is that international companies and companies from more developed parts of the world are seeing opportunities in Africa, particularly in the parts of the continent where there's an emerging middle class, in order to take advantage of opportunities of those urbanizing communities, of having larger middle classes where there are consumers who can afford the next tier of products in those different markets. So there's certainly that, corporates seeing that level of opportunity. And then I think the third level of FDI is actually starting to come from companies investing in the continent where they see the opportunity to bring manufacturing into parts of the continent. And I think specifically of Kenya as an area where we're starting to see the beginnings of manufacturing hubs. And particularly some foreign capital coming from Asia to begin to fund the FDI in that area.
Jimmy, I want us to pick up on that point that Rory raises, in particular around manufacturing capacity. Do you get a sense that from a policy perspective that African governments are passing the right types of incentives and the right type of regulations to increasingly make this continent competitive when it comes to building that manufacturing capacity?
To an extent, I don't think I get that that sense that they're doing enough as they should be. It's almost like most of the countries, they speak using one voice. However, I think they would be more vocal if they spoke with one voice per block. So you look
back to the regional economic communities, in essence.
Exactly. Yeah, so if you look at, for example, the Southern Africa Development Community, if they were all to come together and agree that this is the angle that we want to go and these are the things that we want to drive forward, and then speak with one voice, I think that would go a long way in boosting the manufacturing and incentivizing it the right way, making it attractive for the investors.
Jolene, we've been talking about regional integration on the continent since the days of the OAU, which has been many, many years ago. Are the RECs or the regional economic communities working so that we can see more FDI being driven at a regional approach and maybe take on some of Dumi's concerns in the process?
Yes. So if I have a look at some of the regional blocks, and I can speak from the way in which the payment systems have been reorganized in order to do that. The SADC region, the Southern Africa Development Community, launched their cross-border same-day payment system in July last year. And that has seen a fundamental shift in the way in which the region will now be able to pay one another across the border on a same-day basis, where it took 2 to 3 days before. So if you have a look at the regional integrations, if you look at the cooperation in the East Africa bloc, they've got a East African payment system where all the regional currencies can be settled as domestic currencies across those borders, in terms of Kenya, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda and Uganda, and there are some more of the states coming into that. So if you look at the regionalization, West African Monetary Zone is a little bit trending behind, but the objective is macroeconomic convergence, which I think is something that we will park on one side, but the payments, facilitation of payments to ensure that the regional trade can now be facilitated. And that's the objective that we should all be working towards in terms of that regionalization from a payments perspective.
Let's test that hypothesis with Jude, since he is sitting in Nairobi. Jude, the ability to facilitate payments across the region, looking at a monetary union that seems to be working. This is what Jolene is speaking about. Is it as glossy as it appears from as far as South Africa?
I would partly agree and partly disagree. Why disagree? I'm looking at FDI in form of intra-regional investment, and what has been happening in the East African community is we have Kenyan companies expanding into the region. Best example is Britam, where we have expanded into Southern Sudan, Rwanda, Burundi, and can say Tanzania, and right now we are covering 7 countries. So payment system, I would partly disagree, because although we are in 7 countries as Britam, we still have different payment systems within the country. What has driven expansion, or I can say intra-regional FDI, is relaxed regulations in terms of business, licensing and other ease of doing business across the various countries in the region.
So it certainly sounds like regulation and the overall ease of doing business has come to the forefront as one of the key drivers of regional integration. We're going to be taking that on after the break. But for now, a very big thank you to Jude Anyiko, the CEO of Britam Asset Management. He's going to be leaving us now, but it is time for a quick break. When we come back, we get into that story around regional integration, foreign direct investment broadly, and of course, foreign aid on the continent. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Invest Africa. Tonight we're talking about foreign aid and investment. Remember that we do value your suggestions and your feedback, so please send us an email. That's to investafrica@abn360.com, or talk to us on Twitter. That's by following me at Nozi Pombandra or at CNBC Africa. And of course, the hashtag is Invest Africa. Still with me, my guests, I have Rory Ord. He is the head of Riskura Fundamentals, and he joins us from Cape Town. And in our Johannesburg studio, I'm sitting with Dumi Jerry. He's the head of strategy in Africa for AfriCatalyst, and Jolene Young, associate director at KPMG. And joining us now from Abuja is Dr. Patrick Kumawa. He's a director at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. Maybe let's start off in Nigeria with Patrick, having just joined us. Patrick, just before the break, we were talking about foreign direct investment into the various regions in Africa and trying to understand what drives regional foreign direct investment. And perhaps the key concern I want to raise with you now is looking at those smaller landlocked countries in Africa that are not a good investment case for industry players because they just don't have the market to be a good investment case. Are we finding that regional integration is perhaps working in their favor and ironing out some of those imbalances?
Well, the landlocked countries, particularly in Africa, are really disadvantaged because, first of all, some of these countries are small in size, which provides a disincentive to investors. Second, some of these countries have experienced long periods of instability. And when you have instability, again, that serves as a disincentive to investors. Small landlocked countries also, the market size, most of the time is very, very limited, which again serves as a disincentive. So for such countries, I believe there is a need to sponsor or to support these with foreign aid, because we need foreign aid for these countries. One, the problem, for instance, of climate change is also hindering their progress. So you need foreign aid for such countries to soften the landing pad for investors. Because if, for instance, investors wanted to invest in agribusiness, for which some of these countries may have comparative advantage, because of the limited size, because of the effect of climate change, we need foreign aid to serve as a landing pad to soften, to sort of attract investment.
Rory, maybe let's test that hypothesis that Patrick has put on the table, because the argument has always been that if you ease the cost of doing business, so you reduce the cost of doing business, you harmonize the regional policies, you align and harmonize regulations, that even the smaller landlocked countries should be benefiting from foreign direct investment. Would you concur with that particular sentiment, and would you support the other assumption that Patrick has made, which is maybe these countries are still prime candidates for aid?
What investors really want is certainty, particularly foreign investors who don't have as good an understanding of the local conditions, rules, legal systems, all the regulation that goes around actually investing in a new country. What those investors really want is certainty that they understand the environment in which they're investing. And to the extent that countries can make that process easier, more understandable, they can actually really improve the situation, improve the conditions for foreign investment coming in. And just to add to what Patrick said, I think there's some key areas where foreign aid is actually very, very useful, and areas that foreign direct investment are probably never going to fill, such as the areas of where certain governments don't have sufficient tax revenue to actually provide basic services such as health, some education services to their populations. And that's the area really where aid has a role to play to create populations that are healthy, populations that are educated, to the extent to provide conditions for foreign direct investment to come in and then take advantage of those conditions and really grow businesses and grow the economy in that way.
Jolene, how far are we from that picture that Rory paints, where perhaps foreign direct investment can create a substantial number of jobs that could see a strong tax base emerging and maybe then see a reduction of aid in those particular countries?
We're a way off still. If we have a look at these two things that I would say that can balance that out. One is the investment in basic infrastructure. So if you have a look at any service that you have across the continent, the basic infrastructure, roads, rail, electricity, telecommunications, those are the basic infrastructures where the foreign direct investment can bring some alleviation. If I have a look at the case for the landlocked countries, the connectivity to other countries through infrastructure is one way of getting them in touch with some of the neighbors where that trading partner can start flowing the investment through that. The aid pieces for some of these smaller countries is always going to be a case because of the limited value. If you look at worker remittances and if you look at how much of that actually sustains the large portion of the GDP, those remittances coming in send money back home are to some of the smaller countries and some of the more rural areas. But increasing the way in which the telecommunications is participating in payments and understanding how those infrastructures can be improved will now bring those things together. The regionalization from a payments perspective will also bring that closer, but there's a long journey still to walk. And Africa at this time is recovering some of that lost, broken and poorly maintained infrastructure.
Yeah.
And that's what the focus should be looking at. So investors coming in are building roads, are building ports, are building railways. And those are the things, putting up the infrastructure investment that the World Bank has recently released. Those are the things that is going to bring the continent into a space of self-sustainability and get the structures in place for the basic health care, the basic services that the people need.
Dumi, let's take the case of Mozambique to maybe carry on from the points that Jolene has raised, in particular around infrastructure. My fear is that we're seeing the mushrooming of economic hubs, and these are not necessarily being connected to the broader geography of that country. In Mozambique, we're seeing the rail, we're seeing the port development that Jolene is speaking about, but outside of Maputo, very little development. And can we then conclude that within African markets we're finding pockets of foreign direct investment and not a broader development of that particular economy?
All right, so I'll go with the view that the broader picture, and I think for us to get the broader pictures, we gotta have smaller pockets of development leading up to the big picture that we have. So when we look at Mozambique, for example, yes, outside of Maputo, there isn't much that we know of happening. However, you gotta also keep in mind that outside of Maputo is where we have found the recent oil and gas discoveries, and so many international companies are coming through with FDI, the likes of Shell and so forth, coming through and investing in those particular regions. So, and I think one way or another they will have to develop from where it is that they're getting the current oil and gas all the way through to the capital city. So that would then require a development in terms of the roads, the rails, and so forth.
Patrick, there are many lessons that we can learn from Nigeria when it comes to the management of the extractive industries. As new pockets of minerals and resources are being discovered across the continent, how do we ensure that the foreign direct investment that follows these discoveries actually translates into a broader development for the people of those economies?
I think that this is one of the things that is happening in West Africa or in Africa as a whole. The discovery of natural resources, the discovery of oil. And here in Nigeria, where I currently live, I think there have been some great leap in this sector, wherein they've set up a sovereign wealth fund. And I believe this is one way they are going to use those resources to solve the huge problems in infrastructure. And this is something that Africa needs to learn from, because until we are able to address the huge infrastructure gap, until we are able to invest into human resources, until we are able to invest in industrialization and in innovation, development would be far-fetched from Africa. But for countries that are having natural resources, we can also learn from the example of South Africa beneficiation policies, that Natural resources should be used to develop the real sector. Natural resources should be used to solve the investment, the infrastructure problem. Natural resource, money from natural resources should also be used to develop the human capacity that we need. Foreign investors are coming. For instance, Nigeria recently completed a privatization process of the power sector. But there's a huge need for human resources to solve or to increase the demand that has been created by investors in this sector. So I believe that one way Africa can solve most of these problems, particularly countries that have natural resources, minerals, is to invest into infrastructure, invest into human resources, invest into bases that we attract investors into the real sector, particularly industry.
On that note, Patrick, we have unfortunately come to the end of tonight's episode, but that point not being undermined, foreign direct investment has to rest on the investment of the human capital of this continent. A very big thank you to my guests for making the time to join us this evening. Please don't forget to send us your comments. The details are on your screen. But for right now, Bruce Whitfield is standing by to bring you Tonight with Bruce. From myself and the Invest Africa team, it's goodbye for now.